I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany. Sorry, could we do another take?
It isn't easy to make history. For any big historical event, you need a host of people working behind the scenes to make it happen. In this series, we speak to those unsung heroes, because history doesn't just happen, it gets made in places like this. This week, we look at the outbreak of World War II. By the end of World War I, or the War to End All Wars, as the project was originally titled, the idea of another war only 21 years later was inconceivable, not least to the Prime Minister of the day, Neville Chamberlain.
I don't think anybody in their right mind wanted a repeat of the 1418 war. Plot-wise, the first one didn't hang together at all. I mean, were we seriously expected to believe that the whole thing started because a guy shot some archduke in Austria? It was ludicrous. So I wasn't massively interested in doing a sequel, but I took the meeting, and from the moment I got off that plane from Munich in '38, I knew we had problems.
And here is the paper?
You see, that's all it was, a piece of paper. And I was expecting at least a first draft, but all I was given were a few basic plot ideas. So I felt maybe I was wrong for the project, and I suppose other people felt that too.
With time now running out, the decision was made to replace Chamberlain, and the job of finding that replacement fell to casting director Gareth Hawley.
For the role of Prime Minister, it was always going to be a pretty short list, and Winston Churchill was right at the very top of it. After all, he'd been a decorated soldier, First Lord of the Admiralty, and Chancellor of the Exchequer. And we always knew he was going to be ready for a starring role, and when he came in, he just blew us away.
We shall prove ourselves once more able to defend our Highland home, to ride out the storm of war, and to outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary alone.
Of course, when you think of him nowadays, you always think of Churchill with the cigar and the big hat. But when he came in for the audition, he was wearing a beret. But that was Win. He liked to experiment. For ages, he wanted to play the Prime Minister with a Geordie accent.
But as soon as Churchill came on board the project, he was to feel the pressure.
Obviously, I was delighted to get the job, but from day one it was a challenge, because that's the thing people forget about the Second World War. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of tension. Add to that the fact that we didn't even have our villain yet. We didn't have a bad guy.
And finding the perfect bad guy was now crucial, putting casting director Gareth Hawley under even more pressure than Churchill himself.
We must have looked at everybody, and we were getting desperate, because when you've got someone like Winston Churchill, you've got to match him up against a real heavyweight, otherwise no one's going to buy it. And then one day I'm looking through some audition tapes, and I discover this Austrian fella, who, in German, was shouting dialogue from HMS Pinafore. And that was Hitler. And I went, wow. But clearly the man was insane, bad-tempered, and you could tell he was going to be very difficult to work with. But, you know, right then, we knew we had our villain.
But sure enough, once war began, the attitude of the young devil-may-care Hitler would cause problems for Churchill.
Well, let's just say Hitler and I had very different ways of working. I preferred to rehearse as much as possible. He preferred to invade Poland, which I thought was deeply unprofessional.
But Hitler's own recollection of their working relationship was somewhat different to Churchill's.
Sure, we had our disagreements, but I never fought personally with Churchill. Most of the battles were just between his people and my people, and but yes, eventually we had to get our agents involved, secret agents mostly. But what can I say? It was a crazy time, crazy time.
And back in that crazy time, it was becoming ever more important to win the promotional war too, something Churchill was only too aware of.
You see, with a project like World War II, you have to remember that the budget was enormous, which means you have to get bums in uniforms. So I knew we needed a big scene, a real truth you can't handle the truth moment. So we worked on it, and eventually came up with some dialogue we were happy with. We shall fight them on the beaches. We shall fight them on the landing grounds. And I think I did the whole speech in one take. And I just thought, yeah, that's the line. That's the one they're going to put on the posters.
But even with a generous budget and the PR campaign in full swing, Britain was still running out of money. And for Winston Churchill, that meant taking the toughest decision of all.
By now, it was clear to me that we needed a co-funding deal, because you have to remember, we weren't just shooting the Germans in France. We were shooting them in North Africa. We were shooting in Italy, Pinewood, you name it. So I picked up the phone to Frank Roosevelt, who was then president of, I think it was the United States, and I said, Frank, let's do some business.
Next week, we speak to the director who found an unknown northerner with a distinctive haircut and turned him into mining superstar Arthur Scargill. And we'll speak to the location manager who persuaded JFK that Cuba was the ideal setting for a dramatic missile crisis instead of Kennedy's first choice of Barbados. I hope you'll join us on Lights, Camera, History.